if we can just talk a little bit about the, I think, I might get this incorrect, but you did a translation for the Great Collection of the Lives of the Saints. Is that the name of it?
Yes.
Yeah, that's it. All right, so can you explain what that is and why you did that?
Okay, so it's those books. I don't know if your cameras can point up there.
We'll tell the audience that the books are up there. Yes. They're up in this area.
Okay. And there's a couple missing, a couple volumes missing because people have it out of our little lending library here. Around the year 1900, there was a series of the Lives of the Saints put out in Russian, which was based on Saint Demetrius' work. And for a large part of it, I would say maybe around 70%. It's just a straight translation from Slavonic into Russian. For the rest, the lives in the Russian version may deviate to a greater or lesser extent. Sometimes it's just some passages. In other cases, the lives can be significantly different or, really completely different. There are some lives that are in the Russian version and that are not in the Slavonic version, and vice versa. Okay, so I had a set of those, which was given to me by, if I remember correctly, it was a former professor at the seminary whom I had as a parishioner in St. Petersburg. And that was a big help to me because we had, rather frequent services down there because of the size of the community and the fact that they were all retired, so they could actually go to church, and they were, quite good about that. So I got in the habit of, I didn't have time to read the lives for every day, but whenever we were going to have services, whoever was the saint of that day, I read it. And basically, because there was a high degree of correlation between what was in this set and the liturgical Menaion. Okay, in other words, the service book, which gives the saints of the day according to the monthly calendar, May 1st, May 2nd, May 3rd, May 4th. I began sort of this little discipline of reading it. I became very attached to it, and what I found is that having just read the Lives of the Saints during the course of the week prior to, let's say, the Saturday, or if it was a weekday feast, that when the service came and Stichira were chanted and the canons were read to the saints, that they became alive to me in a way that when I just went to church and, you hear it without knowing anything about the saint, it just sounds like, well, it's a lot of rhetoric, But no, those canons were written by the great hymnographers that were composed those service books, primarily St. Joseph, the hymnographers, St. Theophanes, the hymnographers. They're based very closely on the Lives of the Saints, exactly as St. Demetrius has it. And so therefore, when you know this Lives of the Saints fresh in your mind, you've just read it, and you go to church and you hear those services, it has a tremendous spiritual impact on you. Well, when I left the parish, which I did with great, it was one of the hardest things I ever did in my life, because in the 7.5 years I was there, I really grew to love the people, and at least a lot of them, I think, really loved me. But which I felt was necessary for my children, because there were no other children in the parish. The services were all in Slavonic, and I wanted them to have a different experience. And by this time, my children were getting, to an age when that was maybe starting to matter a little. I couldn't really find a good situation, so I took a little parish in Erie, which was had just like 12 old people, because of the president of the old ritualist church there, which it was a good, nice situation for young people, and so my children had the opportunity to go there a lot. The pastor there suggested that I translate something that he wanted to see how my Slavonic was, and then if that went all right, that maybe I could start translating some of their books for them, and they would try to pay me a little something for my effort. So first I did a partial translation of their Typikon. And then he asked me, okay, so what would you like to do? Well, strangely, because Saint Demetrius wasn't a big aficionado of the old ritualist, but because there just was nothing else like this, what he had done in Slavonic, and nothing at that point in any language that approached it in quality. They used it, and what they did is they just made a few grammatical changes in order to fit it into their version of Slavonic. And so I started working on that, and actually they continued, funding me, a little bit of money for, I think, the first maybe 2 or 3 volumes. And they just wanted to see the project get started, and then, they had to stop because of they had their own financial, responsibilities to the parish. But I was always very grateful to them for that, because I probably wouldn't have gotten started on it, even though I'd already acquired a love for this series. At first, Jordanville was going to publish it, but then Chrysostom Press, which also published the explanation of the Gospel of Saint Philaret of Ordained, wanted to do it. So, I talked with Archbishop Lars, and he was amenable to let them do it. And so then they took it over. So that's how things got started. And since, after a little while, I didn't stay in Erie very long. I was only there for 2.5 years. But when I came here to St. Nicholas Parish, the Rocor parish here, I was able to get a lot of work done initially, because I didn't work for a little while. I was painting icons, but I was at home with the children, and Montes was working part-time out. And then after, 3 years or something like that, then I started working, but I wasn't working full-time, and so I still had a good amount of time to continue working. Eventually, when the troubles in Rocor began, where it became evident that they were going to go into union with the Moscow Patriarchate, I realized that I needed to go full-time at work. And so that slowed down the project, but I never stopped working on it. And I would like to tell you that now that I'm retired, that things are just moving forward at lightning speed. But unfortunately, when you get older, and especially after you retire, you think that you're going to do all these things, but it usually doesn't happen. You just slow down. And but however, I did manage to complete last year another volume, which would have been the May volume. And then now I have the June volume, which is very nearly ready to go to the publisher. But in the case of the Lives of the Saints, producing a literary as opposed to a literal translation is, at least in my opinion, it's essential. Why? Because for people who are at the beginning of spiritual life, and even those who are maybe not at the beginning, but still, on the first steps, after the Gospels, there is no reading that is as essential as the Lives of the Saints. The Lives of the Saints really teach us what lived orthodoxy is. Bishop Maximus has told me that the single most important thing in bringing him to the decision of becoming a monk was the fact that he was inundated with the Lives of the Saints when he was very young. I started reading him those lives when he was 6 or 7 years old. He and his sister would come home from school, and if I was there, I would edit while reading aloud to him, and to both of them. The Lives of the Saints are essential for every Orthodox Christian to read and to be familiar with, even if they don't read anything else besides the account of the Lord's life itself, which is really the life of the one who is holier than all the saints, and in other words, the one that is the Holy One, Oios, above in the full sense of the word. Okay, so the Gospels themselves are, the life of the Holy One, and these are the lives of the lesser holy ones. So, and in order for them to have their proper impact, they must not be something that you read and it's something unnatural, and that would never you'd never read this book if it weren't that you wanted to get the data in it. Okay, it has to make it alive for you. It has to combine the hieratic language that Orthodox texts are properly written in, and in the same way that iconography conveys the spiritual presence of a saint, that conveys this aroma of sanctity, and in the way that an icon does in a visual way, the Lives of the Saints. It should, if it's correctly translated, it should convey that. And at the same time, read as natural English. I remember for a while my sister, who's not Orthodox, was reading quite a number of Orthodox books. Well, she was in her earlier life, she was an English teacher. And she told me one day, she says, every Orthodox book I read reads like a translation. And that was not a compliment, I'm afraid. So, of course, I never had any literary pretensions. I never had any interest in particular in being a writer or something like this. But by the School of Hard Knocks, and after 2 or 3 volumes had come up, I sort of came to a sort of a plan as to how this should be done. And of course, you always stand on the shoulders of your predecessors. Even great saints, like, okay, we think of St. John of Damascus. I mean, like, who could write better than that? Okay. But you look at his apostle canon, he's standing on St. Gregory the Theologian's shoulders. Okay. And he's lifting, it would be plagiarism by today's standards. In the Orthodox understanding, being original is not just going off and doing your own thing. It's being faithful to the originals. And so we want to be faithful to the originals of what Saint Demetrius of Rostov did in the Slavonic, and give, not by a literal translation, which is going to be very wooden in English, but by giving a literary translation in as good literary English as that the translator is capable of, and standing on the shoulders of the other people who have tackled the lives of the saints beforehand, learning from the lessons that they have to teach us, both in terms of their positive accomplishments, and then also having a humble but realistic understanding of where they've fallen short and trying to do a little better. You can even say that in respect to the original author, you have to have that same approach, because, of course, the original author didn't just have to worry about putting it into that language that he was writing in successfully, but he had to compose the life. And even in the case of Saint Demetrius, who kept very, very close to his original sources, which I've verified over time and time again, you want to present him in the best possible light. So if he fell a little short in how he phrased something, let's say he got a paragraph that's kind of scrambled up, and it doesn't follow. I mean, even the saints were men, and they said things, sometimes in an imperfect way. And you see that you can take that same material and restate it. We're not dealing with the scriptures here, okay? So as long as you convey the thought successfully, and you can put it in a better order, then you have that much latitude. And so, of course, now I wish I could go back to those first volumes and re-edit them and do a little better with them. But I probably won't live long enough, and even with Vera's help. And even if I do, it's a lot easier, like if you run out of books, to just reprint than to go through that whole process and retypeset and have to, so they'll probably stand like this, and maybe in who knows how many years, somebody with more talent and ability than I will come along, and he'll look at them and say, okay, now it's time for another edition, and we're going to get it a little better.
can you think of any saint stories that you'd recommend for your kids for them to listen to?
All of them.
Oh, there we go. That's the answer.
All of them. The more the better. And the more you can steep your children in the lives of the saints, the better it is. Parents in our day and age really need to understand that if they just rely on bringing their children to church, the odds are really stacked against them. And maybe, if they're in a regular parish with a normal life, it's going to be better. And if you have a really vibrant parish, that's going to be better. But the world works powerfully against our children as it never has before. It's always worked against them, but more so now. And so, therefore, they need to do whatever they can to foster piety. Fortunately, today, the resources in the English language that are available to assist them with this are like by an unbelievable, I won't say an infinite factor, but an unbelievable factor, greater than, say, when my children were very young. When mine were young, I can remember we started off, that book that we were using for the class there,
Law
like reading Shakespeare, which you can always also learn good English from, but liturgical English. And it will help them understand the services when they go to church. And by that I mean to internalize the service, because the same devices of rhetoric which are employed by the holy hymnographers in the divine services are employed in a prose fashion in the lives of the saints. They will, especially at that young age, they will come to understand basic spiritual principles in a way that they're not going to get from reading an adult spiritual book. They're probably not going to be ready for that kind of reading yet. But this will prepare them for that. And so if an adult who is in so let's say a spiritual child, as in this day and age, and almost all of us are, requires the lives of the saints as elementary school. Much more do children in elementary school require the lives of the saints, which are the elementary school, spiritual elementary school for us. Also, while they might not have the discipline to read the lives of the saints themselves, you will be putting them in a situation where they will be forced to learn to listen and help them to learn to read. Spiritual reading is not primarily about getting information. Now, it is that to a certain extent, but we read the lives of the saints not so that we can memorize, all the particular tortures they suffered, or what asceticisms they employed, but rather to extract from them spiritual principles, sort of eternal spiritual principles that are applicable to all of us, and then to begin to understand how to adapt these principles to ourselves. Now, of course, at a young age, it's very helpful if the parent himself understands enough of these spiritual principles so that he can explain to the child those principles as he's going along reading the life of the saint. So parents, hopefully, in their own spiritual life, have attained enough understanding that they can provide for their children that thing. And what will happen with most children is they'll get it. Once they've heard it enough times, and hopefully they've heard their parents' explanation, but not too many times, because as any experienced parents knows that, how should I say, the parents have to say enough, but not too much. Yeah. Okay.
I enjoyed this talk very much. It was very nice having tea with you. And I wanted to say thank you so much for letting me come here to Owego and being able to interview you.
Well, thank you for bearing with my ramblings. And and we hope that that we didn't bore the audience, but God willing, there'll be something in it for somebody out there.
Thank you so much for watching Tea Time at the Seminary. If you liked what you saw today, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to our YouTube channel called St. Photios Orthodox Theological Seminary.
Cheers.